Hello, hello, good morning. It's Monica from Life is Art, and this is the Friday 10 a.m. technique at the Art and Artists online crop. We had a lovely day yesterday. We were looking at um, three different art movements, and we're looking at three more again today. It's very exciting. We're going to be starting off today doing a technique that makes something look cozy as a quilt. From the September through December mini catalog, we're going to be using the Reindeer Days DSP for this particular adventure. We're also going to be using the Forever Plaid 3D embossing folder, and we're going to do some heat embossing as well, and we'll see where we go from there. We're going to be using a stamp set from this catalog as well. Let me see if I can quickly find it. I did not mark it before I came in, which is always a mistake. There we go. We're going to be using Peaceful Season, and it's got all sorts of lovely sentiments on it. Great for creating cards. Now, this particular technique that I'm doing can be used on any project, so it's not particular to cards, but I am going to do it on a card today so you can see it happening. And because it involves an embossing folder, you're going to have to stay within the confines of your embossing folder. So if you were doing it for a scrapbook layout, you would want to just make however many panels you would need to fill the space that you want to fill. So I'm going to start out with a piece of early espresso cardstock, which is a nice deep brown. And and this is a 5x7. So I've cut it to 5 inches by 7 inches because it's going in my embossing folder, which is the Forever Plaid 3D embossing folder. This is a large embossing folder. So this is why I say it works just as well on a layout. So this is a 6 by almost, yeah, pretty much 8.5. So if you were doing a 6x8 album, this would be easy peasy. You could do your whole page. But on a larger, say 12x12 format, you could make a couple panels of this and then just spread them out however you want them on your layout. If you're joining me live, just say hello or howdy so I know you're here. And if you're watching later on replay, you can say replay. I love to see your comments when they come up. So hopefully we've given everybody enough time to find the link before we get started. I don't like to jump in right at the very first second, but I don't like to delay too long either. So again, early espresso cardstock, and I've cut it to 5x7. And then I'm going to bring in some of the gorgeous patterns from the Reindeer Days. And the way that I'm doing that is I have a whole bunch of 1.5 inch squares. Let me just double check. Yes, 1.5 inch squares. And I've done 2 of each pattern that I wanted to use. So I've got the little Christmas presents. So I've got 2 of those. I've got the one that has the cute little reindeers. So I've got 2 of those. And yes, I admit it, I did cut them so that I had these little vignettes inside the square. Okay, I did have to do a little bit of fancy footwork with the trimmer to get that. It wasn't exactly just, slop it off the edge. 2 of the strings of lights pattern. 2 of the hollies and berries. Whoops, it's gonna fall. 2 of the cute little trees. There we go. So these patterns are easy. I didn't have to do any fancy footwork. And then 2 of these ones with the deer with the pool party background. So again, these ones I did a little bit of fancy cutting to get those particular deer on that particular piece. Okay, so that gives us a total of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 little squares, 1.5 by 1.5 inches. And what we're going to do is we're going to arrange them on our early espresso, and we're going to create a grid because we're making it look cozy as a quilt. And so to do that, we need to, make a nice little quilt pattern. And I'm going to just kind of randomize my things here. I don't really want two patterns side by side. And there is going to be a bit of a gap in between. So we'll just kind of, let's go for some presents next. And then maybe our little deer can go there. Maybe this deer. I think that's cute. We'll put that deer there. And then let's put some holly up here. And maybe the lights again, because they're nice and spread out there. And sure, let's add another deer. Do we want that one? Maybe I'll switch these two. Yeah, I think I'll switch those two. And then we'll stick this one up here because that's a nice distance from that one. Add in some presents and some trees. And yes, the trees are in the same row, but they're spread out, so that'll be okay. All right, so that's kind of the pattern that we're going for with our little squares. And I'm just going to refresh my screen because my video seems to have stalled out. There we go, back in business. And now we need to attach these. I could use liquid glue, which would probably be faster, but I'm going to use my adhesive tape here. And so I'm just going to add, I should have done this ahead of time, but when you're crafting, you're going to have to put the adhesive on too. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick my adhesive on. Do you have a preferred kind of adhesive? Are you a liquid glue user? I know my mom is. I like this. I do use liquid glue, but sometimes I'm impatient. And because I'm going to stick this through with the embossing folder here in a second, I don't really want to have to wait for liquid glue to do its thing, if you know what I mean. I know some people use the big dispensers for this kind of adhesive. Other people use the runners. Some people use glue sticks. So many options when it comes to adhesive, right? What's your preference? When I'm doing things that require really good stick, I use the red tape stuff. There we go. Okay. That didn't take too long. We zipped our way through that. Just going to grab my take your pick tool. And now I need to take the backings off these. And get them situated. I find that this is going to be the easiest thing for me to do is to use my tweezers. And I like to do my two outside pieces first if I can. And that way I can kind of center the one in the middle, in between my two outside pieces. And it doesn't have to be super, super, super precise, because if you think about, well, the quilting that I've done in my life, it's never been exactly straight. So, and we're also going to run it through the embossing folder, so we can kind of have a little bit of grace with ourselves. If you wanted to be super precise, you could. You could use a ruler, line things up. But I don't think that's going to be an issue here. And we're just going to build. And hopefully I've got my spacing okay. There is a little bit more space on the vertical than there is on the horizontal, just with the 5 by 7 measurement. and the 1.5 inches, so I can leave a little bit more gap at the top and bottom, and a weensy bit extra in between each row as I go up. And if you get really off with your measurement, you could always trim it and put a contrast in behind or something. You do you when you're crafting, right? You don't have to follow a recipe. Sometimes we like following recipes because it gets us kind of jump started. That's one thing I find with when I go to an in-person crop, and the start of the day is always a bit slow because you're saying hi to everybody and you're getting yourself situated, and there's a lot of checking things out around the space and all that. And then you go to craft and you kind of need, at least I find, I need a little bit of a jump start to get things going. And that's where I find having a kit or something with me, a scrapbooking kit or a card kit, it's already sort of pre-set out for you what to do. You don't have to think up what you're going to do. And then you kind of feel accomplished because you finished a card or you finished a layout, and then your day's off to a good start because you already did one thing. So sometimes you just need that. Alrighty, so that's when following a recipe is good, when you need a kickstart, a jump start, a spark. Alrighty, we've got all of our squares on there. That's already looking very festive and sort of quilt-like. But now we're going to take it that one step further. We're going to bring in our 3D embossing folder, and I decided on the Plaid because I like how it's got the lines on it. Now, one thing you want to pay attention to is the lines would be kind of replacing where there would be stitching. And with a quilt, there's batting inside. And so the stitching kind of sinks into the batting, and then it kind of poofs up around the stitching, right? In between the stitched areas. So what I want to make sure is that whatever side has the most lines, which would be my stitching. Now, there are lines on both sides of this, just FYI. But the main big lines are the ones that I want on top. So I'm actually going to flip this over because I want these big, big lines on here, the big main ones, to be pushing down in. And then the in-between spaces will be poofing up. So then you just kind of get your embossing folder and you kind of take a look at where it's sitting, and you can kind of play around with where it is and look at your edges and decide what you want to do, because you can see through it, right? And you want to kind of make it a little bit straight. Now, this Plaid is not perfectly even, which is nice because then I don't have to be perfectly even, but I am going to shift it up just a hair. Just a hair. There we go. Okay. And then let's grab our machine. I'm using the old Stampin' Up! Big Shot. And I have found with the 3D embossing folders, it's a little bit difficult of a sandwich. What I do is I leave my big plate in with all the flappies. I take away my bottom plate, and then I put in my folder and my thing. But I want to stagger things here. So I'm going to pull my embossing folder back from the edge a little bit, but push my top plate forward a bit. Make sure everything lines up. And then it'll go in nicely because it's only got those 2 layers. And then it's going to get a little stiffer. And I find that that's just how it is. I haven't found any other better way to do this. And it makes lovely noises. But it hasn't exploded yet. And it's a good arm workout. And then you just run it through. Let me set that aside. And I'll get rid of my machine. I've been using that same Big Shot since I bought it like 20 years ago from Stampin' Up. It's the only one I've ever used. Alrighty. So now when we take this out, you can see that we have a really lovely texture on here. You know that feel of a quilted item that just has that nice like rumply feel to it? That's what you get with this. And you can see how the lines, I'll show you the back side too. The big lines have pushed down in, so on the back they're sticking up, and have created just a fun mosaic of lines over our entire piece. And that creates that quilted look that we were going for. I think that's super cool. All right, so there's our embossing done. We're going to go ahead and stick this on a card base. So this card base is 10 inches by 7 inches. We've scored it in half, and we're just going to fold it down. Give it a good crease, like so. And then we're going to stick our card front right on there. And I'm going to do a few extra lines of adhesive here because we have embossing. So some bits are raised and some parts are sunken in. And when that happens, I'm just going to squish them down a bit. Not everything comes in contact. So you can add a little extra adhesive to make sure everything stays on there good. Now, if I could only get the backing off. 3, 4. There we go. Alrighty. Are you like me? Do you count things in your head? As I'm peeling those off, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4. I even said the last 2 out loud. All right. Now, when I like to stick things that are the same size as or close to the same size as my card base, I put my fingertips along the creased edge, and then I put my piece at a 45-degree angle so none of the adhesive is touching the base, and then I slide it up to my fingertips. And I try to make sure that the top and bottom are lined up with the card base. Now, because we have embossed this, the size will have adjusted slightly. So the other tip I could give you is if you're doing this and you don't want to have any little bits showing, this one's not too bad. There is a tiny little bit, maybe you can see it when I lay it down, a tiny little bit of the white. Because it's embossed, we've kind of crinkled up the cardstock a little bit. So if you want to avoid having any little bits that do that, you could cut it a hair bigger, if you know what I'm saying. And then you don't have to worry about that. If you were really persnickety, you could take it to your paper trimmer and give a little touch. I'm not going to worry about it because, you know, unless I point it out to you, you might not notice so much. But our next step is to add a sentiment on here. I don't really have to do a lot more to this card because we've already got a fun pattern happening, and there's patterns within the patterns. There's embossing on there for texture. I also wanted to point out that when I was choosing my patterns for this, I wanted to think about things that were darker, things that were sort of mid, like these, and then things that were a little bit lighter still. So there's different varieties in intensity of color and white space, and then also thinking about larger patterns versus smaller patterns. So we have things like the deer, which are a larger pattern, the presents. Then we have some sort of mid-size patterns like the I almost say that these are a mid-size pattern because they're kind of close up. But definitely the trees. And then the hollies are also a small pattern. So there's variety, and that's what you want. If all the patterns were similar tone of color and saturation, and if all of the patterns were the same size of pattern, you wouldn't feel as much variety or as much interest. And one of the things that you will notice as we look at all the different art styles is that the ones that make you stop and look at them for a while are the ones that you will find more interesting, I think. So it's the same with scrapbooking, card making. If you have to sit and look at it for a while and your eye gets caught by, ooh, there's a cute little deer over there. Oh, look at them. They're so cute. Oh, look at the little tiny trees. Aren't they lovely? That's what makes people interested or feel attracted to what you create. So that's just my little tip there. Okay, we need to do some stamping because we need a sentiment on here. So I have the Peaceful Season stamp set, and I'm going to bring in a piece of basic white, and we're going to go ahead and stamp the great big word Christmas on there. I've already got it loaded on my block, and we're going to use real red for this because I want to bring in a few more touches of red onto this card. There's lots of green going on, and then we've got that brown base. So I'm just going to use the real red, which is one of the coordinating colors with Reindeer Days. We're going to stamp it here on our basic white. Oh, we're going to stamp it again because I missed getting ink on part of my stamp. Let's try that again. Alrighty. That's the great thing about stamping. You can just stamp it again. That's also why I like stamping on something that's not my project, because you do it once on your project. It's a one and done deal. It's very hard to fix it later on. Okay, so we're going to trim out this one. Do you have scraps of paper like this where you just kind of stamp a couple things and trim them out, and then you have all these weird pieces? I have a drawer full of weird pieces, and that's what I pull from when I do stamping. Now I want to do some fussy cutting on this, so I'm going to start with my most obvious spot, which would be at the beginning of the word, but it's a nice curve. I'm going to be pivoting my paper, which you will notice as I go along here, and leaving a halo of the white all the way around. Now, because this is a scripted font, there's just a lot of ins and outs at the bottom. We're just kind of making a scallop, following the letters as our guide. And because we're leaving a fairly decent sized halo, there's no need for us to go inside any of these letters. We're just going to make a nice bumpy bottom on our word Christmas. See that? And it just kind of follows the curves of all the letters. And then when we get to the end, normally I don't take my scissors off. We're just going to go around the end like that, leaving hopefully about the same amount of white space. And then we're going to come back across the top. You see how that paper just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. You have to learn how to hold it, but hold it loose enough that it just slides between your fingers. It's kind of one of those hand-eye coordination things. I'm great at fussy cutting, not so good at like bouncing a basketball. I didn't get the hand-eye coordination for that. I also have terrible peripheral vision, so I often got hit in the head with balls when I was playing sports in gym class because I just didn't see it coming. All right, so there we go. We've got our word Christmas, and then I want to do something that I like to do, and this is another technique that I want to show you, and that is to add a second layer. We're going to double up. We've got one edging around our stamped image in the white, which I guess is the base. So it's not really a double matte, but because this has been cut out, and we're going to kind of double our fussy cutting here, I'm going to add just a teeny tiny little dot of adhesive on either end of this because I want to remove it in a minute. And this is some of the gold foil. Now we're going to first just do a rough cut so we can save that for another project. Again, all the weird scrappy bits. And then we're going to fussy cut in the exact same manner around our sentiment. And this is a little bit like playing the telephone game. Have you ever played the telephone game where one person says a message in one person's ear and then everybody keeps whispering it on down the line? And what happens by the end of the game? By the end of the game, the message is completely different. So it's the same with doing a single, double, triple matting on something that you're cutting around. The first one will be the most precise, the second one will be less precise, and the third one will be rather blob-like. So as you go along, you're going to find that you don't need to be as precise with the cutting. Okay? You still want to follow the shape, but the shape is going to get less distinct, if you know what I'm saying. And the reason why we just added a tiny little dot of adhesive on either end is because we're going to pop these apart and put some dimensionals in between, just to give something a little extra to this sentiment. Because it's Christmas and we're going to be festive and we're going to go the extra mile because this is what we do sometimes, right? We just do a little extra some days. And so we're just going to pop that off. And because it's foil, it's not going to tear the foil. It did leave a little adhesive behind, but that's okay. And then we're going to grab our dimensionals and we'll add a few of them onto our word. There we go. Take our backings off. And then it's just the task of lining them back up, which isn't terribly awful. Just takes a half a second. And as you know, what I like to use to help line things up, so I'm going to use my tweezers. Alrighty. So we're just gonna, and obviously start with the biggest bit first. Everything else will kind of fall into place if you get that C in the right spot. There we go. So now we have a lovely dimensional popped up little sentiment with some gold foil. Doesn't that look all professional and everything? But we need to add the Mary to this. And so I wanted to do something completely different. Well, not completely different, but a little bit different to make it special. So I've got a teensy-tiny piece of real red cardstock. This has been cut to 1 3/4 by 1/2 inch. And I'm just grabbing some scrap paper here. I'm going to scooch that out of the way. We're going to do some heat embossing on here. So we're bringing in the red color, but instead of doing just the red ink on white, we're going to flip it. We're going to do white on red, and we are going to heat emboss it. So we've got our Versamark ink. We've got our Mary on our stamp block. We're going to ink it up. Now, I didn't use any anti-static on here, so we're going to hope for the best. Just stamp that in the center, and then use our embossing powder. Sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle. Tap, tap. Sometimes I sprinkle twice. And then give it a little blow on there. Sometimes that helps. I do have a few stray little bits, so we're just going to encourage some of those stray bits. Sometimes if you just give them a little nudge and then give them a little poof, that will help. All right, let's grab our tweezers for this next step. Set that down gently. We're going to dump our excess back into the jar. That scrap paper was actually my 30-minute card making stash dash dice roll list. So I don't want to lose that. Put it right back in the drawer. Alrighty. Let's grab our heat gun. And time for embossing. So I'm using my tweezers today because I'm using such a tiny, tiny little piece of paper here. There's not a lot of space to hold, and the heat gun gets hot. So I don't want to get my fingers too hot. We're just going to go ahead. I always lift it up off my work surface, and that way the heat from a heat gun doesn't affect my tabletop or anything on my tabletop. And that's all you got to do. Just a little bit of heat. And then we're going to dovetail the ends of this. So let's see if we got it centered. It's a little touch to the left. So we're going to trim a little bit off the end. For a dovetail, we want to snip right in the center at the end. Just a little snip. And then we're going to come straight from the corner to the top of that snip. And then from this corner to the top of that snip. And then just turn around to the other side and repeat the process. A little snip in the center, and then come in from the side to the top. That snip in the center is what keeps your little dovetail from looking off center. As long as you snip pretty close to the center, then everything else should line up just a-okay. Without having to measure anything, too. All right, we're almost done. Now I want to add a little bit of something to this, so I'm just going to kind of lay things on here and decide where, yep, I think that's good. So I'm going to take a piece of adhesive and weirdly enough, just stick it on right down onto my card front, kind of in that center space, and then I'm going to bring in some of the gold 1/8 inch trim. I've been having fun with these gold and silver trims. They're a nice little size. And each of the rolls on here has, does it say on here? There's 10 yards. And a yard is 3 feet. So there's 30 feet of this stuff on here. So, I mean, I've used a lot of it too, but there's a lot of crafting potential on there. All right, let's just go ahead. We're just going to stick this right into the adhesive. That's why we did it this way. So into the adhesive, we're going to make a loop and just fold over and come back down. And then we're going to repeat. We're going to make a fold over and come back up like that. And then we're going to trim it off. See how I didn't even trim it off the roll beforehand? And that way you don't waste anything. Super simple. All right, let's add some adhesive onto the back of our big Christmas. Like so. And we'll take the backing off. Where's my tweezers? I buried it under my tape. Grab our tweezers. That helps us line it up. I'm going to go a little left of center. And that way I can still see these little deers and that little deer. Like that. Then let's add some dimensionals on the back of our Mary. Oh look, I have just 2 left. Plus all the edges. That was perfect timing. Add some dimensionals. And then decide where this is going to sit. Right about there. And we're going to need some bling on here. So I've got the Adhesive-backed sparkle gems. And these are in gold and, well, I guess black and silver. And you can see I've been dipping into these already because making lots of Christmassy projects lately. I think these sparkle gems are just the ticket. So let's add a big one and a little one. And then, you know what? Let's add another big one down here. Just by this little reindeer's ear. Just like he's got little happy thoughts bubbling out. There we go. We have completed our Cozy as a Quilt 5x7 card. We started out with that early espresso, putting on our 12 1.5-inch square patterns, some of which we cut in a particular fashion to get what we wanted on there. Then running it through that 3D plaid embossing folder to create this fun texture. I'm just trying to hold it in the light so you can see what I can see and feel, and it just makes it look like a comfy old quilt that's been hanging around through festivities for years. And then, of course, we did some stamping and some fussy cutting, adding in that gold foil. Doesn't that add a nice shine? Some heat embossing on our real red cardstock, a little bit of some gold trim, and some gold sparkles. All very festive. I hope you guys are inspired to try that technique of embossing on your pattern papers to create a quilt-like look, and also to try doing the layered fussy cutting. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning. We will be on at 11:30 for Chat and Craft. Thanks for watching. Hey, Lynn. We'll see you soon. Toodaloo. Bye.